you need to throw this at least 20% of the time, just as an example. 1 out of 5 pitches, you need to be throwing this pitch. Because if I'm trying to work on a new pitch and develop it, and I go out and I throw 80 pitches in a game and I throw 3 sliders, well, that's not going to tell me anything. That is not a big enough sample size for me to know, is this actually working? You need to really test it and try to find those opportunities. All right, we're live. Today I am flying solo. Josh was unable to make it, so I'm going to record this one by myself today, and we're going to have a good time. I'm going to do my best to give you some helpful insights. You know, whenever you're going solo, it can be tough to go with the flow. When you have someone else involved in the conversation, it can be easier to bounce ideas off of each other, allow the conversation to go a different direction, but I'll do the best I can by myself today to bring as much value as I can to you guys. So at the end of the day, that is the main purpose of this podcast, is to help you, whether you're a coach or a player, get better at something. I want it to be tangible. I want it to be something that you can implement right away with your team or with yourself if you're a player, or help your kid if you are a parent. So today we are going to talk about developing a new pitch. Developing a new pitch can be a very daunting task when you're initially attacking it, because you don't really know where to start, right? Like, you might have an idea of, I want to throw a curveball, or I want to add a slider to my repertoire, or maybe I just want to improve a pitch, and knowing what to do or what those steps are can be confusing. And it's not that this is the end all be all process that I'm going to dive into today, but I think it's going to be helpful because it's going to give you more of a systematic approach to it. There's going to be a progression and a process of how you can start from scratch and gradually build up. So I hope that this is helpful for you, and we'll just jump right into it. So when we're developing a new process, or a new pitch rather, I believe in a 6-step process that I tend to follow the best I can, especially when we're starting from scratch. And the first one is, we need to decide, what is the pitch? Obviously, what is this new pitch? Why do we want to add this new pitch? And if we have figured out, the purpose of why we want this pitch, we also need to understand, what is it going to look like? What is our goal, movement, and velocity of this new pitch going to do? And how is it going to intertwine with the rest of my arsenal? Because just adding a new pitch for the sake of adding a new pitch doesn't really make a lot of sense. I work with high school kids, at times, and with the high school kids, sometimes I'll ask them what they throw. They'll list all their pitches, and they might say something to me like, I feel like adding a slider. I think it'd be fun to throw a slider. I'd like to learn how to do it, without thinking about, how is this going to intermix with the rest of their arsenal? Is this something that they actually need? What is the purpose of this pitch? So a couple of things before we dive into the process of developing a new pitch is, let's talk about what might be some reasons to add a new pitch to your repertoire. And one of the reasons could be, you need a swing and miss pitch. Maybe the mix that you have right now, you're just not getting any misses, or you're only getting misses to one type of batter and not the other. So maybe you're getting a lot of miss against righties, not against lefties, and you need something that you can attack with that left-handed batter to get good results. Maybe it's something to where you just need a pitch that you can throw for a strike that isn't a fastball. Maybe you throw a really big curveball, you have a split or a depthy changeup, something of that nature where there's a big movement spread, and you just need something that is a secondary pitch that you can just throw in the strike zone and be semi-consistent with it. Doesn't necessarily need to be a big wipeout pitch, but it's just something that you can keep them off balance with and prove that you can throw it in zone. So those are two of the biggest reasons for adding or improving a pitch, is we're trying to get a higher strike rate pitch, or we're trying to get more swing and miss. So keep that in mind when you are going through this process and you are trying to develop something new. Okay, so coming back to step 1 of this, it is deciding what the movement and the velocity of this pitch is going to be. So once again, let's just use the example of, you're a guy that is a right-handed pitcher and you get a lot of miss against righties, but you don't get a lot of miss against lefties. I'm guessing if that is the case, you probably have a very good east-west mix, meaning you probably throw sinkers or a fastball that has good arm side movement, and you might have a sweepy slider that moves to the glove side really well. Those two pitches are going to pair perfectly well against same-sided hitters, and you're going to get good results more times than not, even if you're only throwing those two pitches consistently. On the flip side, if you're facing a lefty and you're throwing that mix, you're going to tend to struggle a little bit more unless you do something unique like Logan Webb does, for example, where he just peppers that sinker inside to lefties, and that allows that sinker to play up and play better than it normally would against opposite-handed hitters. So that's something to think about, like those two pitches right there. This is a clear clear instance where I need something for lefties, whether it's improving my changeup, adding a changeup, or it could even be adding another breaking ball that kind of bridges the gap between that sinker and that sweeper to where maybe it's more of the cutter variety or a gyro slider that's going to be a little bit faster, a little bit more bullety, and it's going to be something breaking hard in on the hands rather than a slower, bigger breaking ball like a sweeper. And now I have another option. So think about it through that lens. And if you have questions, about, what is the right pitch for you to add, that's probably a conversation for another day. And a little plug for my pitch design course that I'm coming out with on June 10th. That will be an aspect that I do dive into, is deciding what type of pitches should you be adding to your arsenal, not just how to throw them, but also how to decide what pitch to throw. So that course, Pitch Design U, is coming out on June 10th. So we'll assume that you know the movement you want, the pitch that you're going after. You've decided that here in step one. You've made logical sense of it, of why this is going to be an important pitch for you. Once you've done that, we are now going to move on to step two. Now in step two, this is more of the experimentation round of where we're trying to figure out what grip is going to work for us. There's multiple grips. There's multiple ways to throw a pitch. You need to find the one that works for you. Now, what I advise guys do is try to have a couple that you have in mind going into a catch play session. So, maybe, you're trying to learn a new slider. You have 3 options. In catch play the next day, you're going to throw 3 to 4 with each grip, and you're going to see which one you just naturally kind of gravitate towards. There's probably going to be one that feels a little bit easier, feels a little bit more natural, that appears to the eye in catch play that it is having this right spin and what you want it to have. So that would be where this step is. It's an experimentation round in catch play. Once we get on to later in the steps and we're actually doing some of the pitch design stuff, we'll talk about how you could still go back to this of experimenting with a couple of grips. But having this idea in mind is going to be really helpful as we're moving down the line into the rest of the progression and the rest of this process. Real quick, everyone, I wanted to let you know about my new course called Pitch Design U. It's set to launch on June 10th. I'm going to be covering the fundamentals of pitch movement, how to throw every single pitch type, as well as knowing which one is right for you, and the analytics behind all pitch types, how, when, and where to use your arsenal. I have a wait list right now where I'm sending weekly insights on details about the course. If you're interested, check out the link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. So moving to step 3, that is where we would go now to the catch play progression. So I kind of alluded to this with those 2 to 3 grips. You're going to throw 3 to 4 roughly with each on that first day, just to get a general feel for which one you like the best, which one tends to be yielding the movement, and you can semi-control where the ball is going. You can kind of see a future where that pitch is going to work. Now, I will say, just because a pitch feels a little weird at first, or a grip feels a little weird at first, it doesn't mean that that one will not work for you. It's just like anything. When you're doing something new, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel different. It's probably not going to click right away. So just be aware of that, and don't necessarily write off a grip just because it doesn't feel great initially. That's just something to really be aware of. So going back to this catch play progression, I always like guys throwing new grips in catch play before they get on the mound, because, I've been in those sessions before where I've even done it myself, coaching a kid or a player, to where we're on the mound and we're trying to learn, a new slider. And I just say, here, try this grip and throw it. And they threw 1 or they threw 2, and it's like, oh, well, that didn't have the movement we want. That didn't look right. Let's try something else. When, going back to what I just said, a grip might not feel great immediately. You might need more reps. And plus, when you're throwing a new grip for the first time on the mound, it's just going to feel weird. It's going to feel different. Like, you want to accustom yourself to the grip in catch play, so you're getting some reps at least for a day, preferably a couple days before you're actually getting on the mound, to test those pitches. Now, there are some progressions that you could use, or some tools that you could use. And my favorite tool by far for all pitch types is using dot balls. So if you've been following me for any amount of time, you've probably seen me share about these dot balls for different pitch types. And essentially all we're doing is we're placing a black dot on the baseball for different pitch types where it is appropriate. And when we're throwing it, we're expecting that dot to be spinning cleanly in a certain position, depending on the pitch type. And that signals to us that the ball is moving and spinning the right way, even if we're not on TrackMan or we're on some sort of tracking device. So I'll be sure to attach a link to YouTube videos for that, on how to make those dots for every pitch type. But just know these dots are essentially telling us where we want the dot position and how the ball should be spinning when we're throwing it, so that we know that we're doing it correctly. So that would be one tool. There are other tools, like you could use a softball. Like, so for a softball that I like to use is a 2-colored ball. So it's yellow and pink, I believe. And it's not a full-size softball, but it is bigger than a baseball. So it's just a little bit bigger, and it has the 2 colors, and the 2 colors can be really helpful for some pitches for seeing the spin, so you can see how the ball is spinning. And it being a little bit bigger can be really helpful for some pitches, such as a curveball. So a progression that you could use with a curveball, for an example, could be to use this bigger ball, because a bigger ball is going to make it harder for me to stay supinated, or for me to get my middle finger to the front of the ball. The tendency is going to be to stay behind that pitch a little bit more with a bigger implement or a bigger ball. So this is a really good tool to use to exaggerate that spin and getting out front. So maybe I start with just being on one knee, to where I am trying to see those 2 different colors overlapping, so I know I'm creating the spin that I want. And I am just flipping them to my partner 10 to 15 feet apart for 5 to 10 throws. Nice and easy, just getting the feel for the spin and that middle finger getting to the front of the ball. Then I could progress it to standing up. And now maybe I'm in an opposite foot forward stance, to where now when I counter rotate, I can feel a little bit of tension in that hip. And as I unwind a throw, it's going to assist me in rotating out front, which can then help me create good spin on the ball. From there, I could progress to a regular split stance, to where now I'm still feeling my full arm action, still going low intent, but I'm able to get it closer to my regular delivery to feel the ball spin. And then lastly, I could progress to either a rocker, or I could even just go to a regular delivery, throwing this pitch, feeling the ball, get out front and creating the right spin. And then I could move on to doing this with the baseball. And after doing all those reps at low intensity with a bigger ball, it should make using the baseball feel much easier for creating the spin that I'm looking for. So that's just one example. Other tools that you can use depending on the pitch type could be a clean fuego. I personally like to use the Club K ball. So it's the same exact idea as the clean fuego. It has the sides of the baseball flat. And the difference between this one and the clean fuego is this one is actually made out of leather, so it feels more like a baseball. Sometimes the clean fuegos get a little slick for me. So that's why I like the Club K ball. You can get that on Amazon, I believe. So those are a couple of good tools. You could even use differential balls for the same idea as the softball, of like a bigger implement, or even using a smaller one in some cases. I can't say that I've done that much, but there could potentially be some use for that as well. So after the catch play progression, we would then move on to step 4, which would be pitch design bullpen. So now we are going to the mound. We're carrying over that work that we just did in catch play with all of our progressions. We've tried these new grips. Now it's time to test it on the mound. If you have TrackMan, great. Obviously, I know not everybody has access to the technology to actually see the way their ball is moving. But once again, it comes back to we can use those dot balls, and that will give us a really, really good idea to see if the ball is spinning the right way. And you could also just use an iPhone behind the mound and basically use that as an Edgertronic camera, or your slow motion camera, I should say, to where you're getting slow motion video at release. And then if you have the dots on the ball, you'll be able to see how it's spinning and see if it's moving the right direction and actually doing what you want it to do. So that's a much cheaper alternative if you don't have access to the technology, is to be making sure that you're using something like a video to where you can actually track it to make sure the pitch is doing what you want it to do. And something else that is really worth noting during these bullpens is to make sure that you're not too concerned with the location of the pitch. So obviously we want to make sure that it's not going everywhere and we're throwing it 30 feet or we're throwing it way over the catcher. But at the same time, we're learning a new pitch and we're really trying to master the shape of this pitch first. That is step 1. So if the ball is sailing and it's not located perfectly where we want it to, don't judge yourself too harshly on that. And as coaches, this is really difficult because we want, guys to be throwing strikes. We want to be preaching that all the time. And sometimes in this type of setting, we start sending mixed signals of, okay, I want this guy to focus on this new shape. I want him to learn this new pitch. And as he's experimenting with new grips and new ideas, we're also judging him on his execution. And that's just not realistic. And now the player, is going to feel pressure and he's not going to want to learn a new pitch. He's going to want to revert back to what's natural and comfortable. So you need to make sure that you are creating a free space to where, honestly, the ball can go wherever it wants. That's not the end goal. I know that's obvious. But during this session, especially this first bullpen or two where they're trying something new, you want to make sure you're given as much freedom as possible for them to feel free to experiment without a consequence for what the result is of the pitch. From there, as we are throwing this pitch, we don't want to just rip 10 sliders in a row. So like if we're working on a slider, like we're not going to just rip 10 of them in a row. We want to make sure we're still throwing our other pitches, or at least the fastball. So, let's just go back to the slider example. I'm trying to develop that. Maybe I go 2 fastballs, 2 sliders, 2 fastballs, 2 sliders, 1 fastball, 1 slider, 1 fastball, 1 slider. Maybe I mix in one of my other pitches if I throw a changeup or something. We don't want to just get too bogged down by throwing the same pitch over and over again that we start to lose feel for our other stuff. Or what I have seen happen as well is you throw too many of the same pitch. Let's just say a slider. I'm trying to work on this pitch, and now it starts to affect the shape of my other pitches because I've put my hand in a certain position. And in this case, in more of a supinated position through release. And now sometimes when guys go back to the fastball, they start cutting it a little bit. So you want to really be aware of that and making sure that you're not going too extreme with the usage of a pitch in these first couple bullpens. Another thing to consider too is we are putting a different stress on the arm, that we are doing something that the arm hasn't necessarily done before. We're not saying that's good or bad, but it is different. So if we are not gradually building players up to throwing a new pitch, you could potentially be dealing with some arm issues down the road. So we just want to make sure that we are aware of those two big things. If we throw too many in a row, the same pitch, we could potentially impact the movement of our other pitches. And we also could be adding extra stress to the arm that could be hindering us and actually start to break down the arm a little bit more than we would like to. So those are some really main things to focus on. And I did, kind of mention this just a second ago, but just to circle back to it, in this phase, we are really focusing on the movement of the pitch, not the execution. I know that's really hard to grasp and to be okay with when we're actually in the middle of it, but I want you to try really hard when we are in this stage, focus on the movement of the pitch, not the location. Once again, if they are completely sailing, it is not even close, that grip is probably not for them. But if they're missing a little bit outside, a little bit inside, or they're spiking it just a little bit, don't freak out. Make sure that you are giving them time to get used to this new pitch and this new grip, especially if the shape is good and they're just missing just a little bit. Make sure that you are being patient with that. Once you feel like this pitch is where it needs to be from a movement standpoint, we then will move on to step 5, and this is the long-awaited one after what I just said, command. Now we want to be able to command this pitch. Because once again, if we have the shape, it's nasty, it's a really good pitch, but it's nowhere near the zone ever, and as we get to this command focus phase and it's still not going where we want it to go, then the pitch isn't going to be usable. Like that's obvious, right? Like that is something at the end of the day, you have to be able to throw the pitch for a strike, especially if this is a pitch that is supposed to be a high strike pitch. That is the purpose of this pitch. Let's just say as an example, then it 100% has to be the focus at some point. You have to make sure that you're able to do it. And that is where step 5 is. So once that movement is where you want it, you will then focus on executing it to a location. I would start by just being broad. So like focus more on this pitch just being in zone to start. Like we're not necessarily going to be nitpicky with where in zone, but if they're throwing it in zone at a decent clip, then that's a good starting point. And, just for a general perspective for you guys, for off-speed pitches, around that 43% mark is about average for off-speed pitches. Changeups and splitters are a little bit lower, closer to 40%. Breaking balls are more in that 44-45% range. So, and that's from an in-zone perspective, not strike percentage. In zone, inside the strike zone, that is the goal. So start with that. Once they are doing that at a high clip of just being in the strike zone, then you can start to split the plate in halves, or even more advanced for some guys to where you can go to thirds of the plate. But really be more broad early on until they prove that they can do that consistently in zone. And then after that phase of command focus, we then go to the last step, and this one is the one that will ultimately determine, did all that work we just did, is it actually working? Was this actually the right decision of adding this pitch? And that is when we face batters and we test it against hitters. Once again, guys, and I'm guilty of this, I love making nasty pitches. I love seeing it look great on a movement plot and all of that. And that's great, right? You look at the top pitchers in baseball, they have nasty stuff. But if you have nasty stuff, but it doesn't get hitters out, then it's not that nasty. That at the end of the day, your job is to get hitters out. So just because it's moving well, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get hitters out. So this is the true test of, is everything lined up the way it needs to be? Are we using our stuff the way we should be? This is the ultimate test. Now, this isn't a perfect world. I'll say the perfect world scenario to start. Ideally, you're testing this in more of a live BP setting to start. So, if say this is the fall or something at your school, or you're in spring training, if you're in pro ball, you're testing this more in a live BP setting to start, and then you're gradually progressing it in game. But what I love about the live BP setting, this is why I'll say this is great to do, or in a scrimmage, but where you're throwing it against your own teammates, is you then can ask for feedback from those hitters, because those are your buddies. You're seeing them all the time. You can actually ask them, okay, hey, I'm working on this new pitch today. What did you see? Did it pop out? Could you tell that I was throwing a slider? How was the shape? Like, were you picking up on it? Like, you can just get really detailed with asking your teammates, how did they perceive that pitch? And hopefully they're going to be honest with you, and they're going to give you some really helpful information on what they're seeing, and you can make adjustments from there. So it's a really good bridge to, between bullpens and an actual game, to where you're actually testing it. They're taking swings off of you, and you can actually see, is this pitch working, or what adjustments do I need to make? And then from there, of course, if it's working and things are going well, you'll test it in a real game and you'll throw it to hitters. With that said, another thing to note when you are throwing this against hitters, like, you need to make sure the usage is actually at a decent clip. So when I was in pro ball and we would implement some of these goals with guys where it's throwing a new pitch, a lot of times we would try to encourage a usage goal. So, for example, okay, I'm throwing a new slider. You need to throw this at least 20% of the time, just as an example. 1 out of 5 pitches, you need to be throwing this pitch. Because if I'm trying to work on a new pitch and develop it, and I go out and I throw 80 pitches in a game and I throw 3 sliders, well, that's not going to tell me anything. That is not a big enough sample size for me to know, is this actually working? You need to really test it and try to find those opportunities. And sometimes players lack the confidence in a new pitch because it's new. They haven't proven to themselves that this actually works. So sometimes as a coach, you really got to encourage them to push it a little bit, throw it more. Now, I do recognize almost every level outside of pro ball nowadays calls pitches. So as a coach, you do determine the pitch usage in a lot of cases. So in that case, like, I would say 20% usage is probably the minimum of where you want to be when you're first testing this, to make sure that you're getting meaningful reps in. And you probably don't want to exceed 30%, because coming back to what I said about the bullpens, the new pitch, you are doing something different with your arm when you are throwing this pitch, likely. And there's going to be a little bit of an adaptation phase of where your arm needs to get used to you actually throwing this pitch. So our first game, we probably don't want to throw 50% sliders. We want to ease into it. And that 20% mark is probably a good range, especially since we've been throwing it in bullpens for weeks. And we've also thrown it a live BP potentially. We should be ready to go to throw it 20% of the time, to where, if I'm throwing 80 pitches in a game, I'm throwing whatever that math would be, 15-ish sliders there. That should be a reasonable number to shoot for. So that's my advice with that. Like, I think that is the ultimate test. And from there, you'll be able to understand what adjustments you need to make moving forward. Then another reminder, this doesn't all happen in 1 week, right? Like, we just went through 6 steps. There's a lot of things going on here. You can't expect things just to click immediately. Does that happen sometimes? Sure. And it's awesome when that does. That makes your life much easier. But more times than not, it is going to be a process that's going to take time. So be patient. If you're a coach, be patient with it. If you're a player, be patient and understand where you're at in these steps. Most of the time, guys are hovering around step 4 a lot in that pitch design stage. You want to make sure that you're not staying there too long before you start to move on to either a new grip, a new pitch type, if maybe you just don't gravitate towards it. Like, just as an example, a year ago and, 2 years ago, even, like, sweepers became a really popular pitch, and some players just couldn't throw that pitch because of the way their body moved. It was very unnatural for them to create a lot of sweep. And if you rack your brain around it long enough, or you keep trying it and you keep trying new things and it's still not working, or if in order to get the shape, you have to drop your arm slot or do something funky or different, that's not good either. Because now if we don't ever get there, we don't reach it, now we just wasted a bunch of time. So we need to know, okay, how long is long enough? And I would say you can pick up on this probably within 3 to 4 bullpens of someone throwing this, of like, yeah, this guy's just never going to figure this out, or yeah, we're on the right track. Like, he's really close. Because you should be able to see a glimmer of it. Like, they might not be able to get the shape you want every time, but like, they should show, a couple of them that are close, probably within that first bullpen or the second bullpen at the latest. So you want to be aware of that. And you also want to be aware of that they're not doing something different with their delivery to create the shape. Number one, because that's going to be a red flag for a hitter. They're going to be able to pick up on that if you're doing something different with your delivery. Number two, it could come back to a potential injury risk because you're doing something unnatural for your body with that pitch. So that is something really important to remember. Okay, and then just to recap these 6 steps again, step 1 is to decide the movement and velocity. So hopefully you've done your homework. You understand how this new pitch is going to play with the rest of your pitches and the purpose behind this pitch. Step 2 is having 2 to 3 grips ready to try initially. Step 3 is doing these grips in a catch play progression to where you are getting feel for the spin at lower intensity. You're getting used to these grips. And then step 4, you are going to step on the mound for your pitch design sessions. If you have TrackMan or some sort of tracking device, you are going to measure the movement of these pitches. If not, you can use your phone in slow motion behind for release to see the way the ball's spinning, and to use dot balls when you're throwing these so you can make sure that it is spinning the correct way. Step 5, after you have the movement where you want it to be, you will then progress to a command focus, trying to make sure that you get it at a high rate in zone, generally in zone, and then gradually progress to different quadrants of the strike zone. Step 6 is to test it against hitters. Ideally, you are in a live BP setting to start, so you can ask for feedback from your teammates, and then eventually you are live in a game. And remember, when you're live in that game, you want to make sure that usage is around 20%, so you're getting adequate amount of reps in to get feel for it, as well as to get the feedback from those live hitters on how are they performing against those pitches. That's all for today. And as always, guys, if you have any questions, please reach out. You can DM me on Twitter. That's probably the best way. You can also email me at pitchingcoachu@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have with this. And once again, I'll have some of those things I talked about in the show notes, the link to my wait list for Pitch Design U, as well as the videos for the dot balls. All right. See you guys next week.